Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Art House Rewind. Hope you are safe and healthy at this point. We are so excited that you're choosing to take a few minutes and just tune into a conversation about a film that we have played here at Art House in our last 5 years of existence. It's been 5 years, everybody. Joining me today, as usual, we have our creative director with us, Brian Ostrike, and then
Hello.
this is our first episode with our events director, Shelly Thoreau. Shelly, thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight, we're talking about a film that is in a different genre than any other film we've talked about up to this point. So it should be a fun, lively conversation. But before we jump into that, as always, we also want to just give a big shout out and thank you to our Art House sponsors, those businesses, individuals, and organizations that are choosing to continue to support Art House Cinema and the Babcock Theater through what they're doing. So thank you, everybody who is a sponsor. Tonight, we want to just specifically highlight Barjan Books. They've been one of our longer running sponsors, and that just means the world to us. It means they've just been a part of supporting us for a while. So thank you, Barjan. And we are so excited to hopefully have you fully open again and Art House fully open again here real soon. Also, really quickly, because I have two individuals that are enjoying some tasty beverages, I think it's important to ask, what are we drinking tonight, you guys, in the midst of our conversation? Brian, you go first.
I am drinking, because we're talking about a film that involves twins. I decided to do a double Grazing Clouds today from Mountains Walking Brewery in Bozeman. It is a very good Northeast double IPA. And they dropped it off to us last weekend. They were nice enough to take some orders and drop them off outside Bar, Montana on Saturday. So I took advantage.
Good job. Shelly, would you like to share with the class anything that you're drinking tonight?
Drinking Kettle One, lime juice, and soda.
Oh, perfect. A mixed cocktail. I love it. Hey, so tonight we are talking about this film, Goodnight, Mommy, which again is a genre that we haven't talked about before, more of the horror suspense, psychological thriller, if you will, kind of film. So, Mr. Ostrike, give us the rundown on this film. What do we need to know about it?
So this came out 2014 is when it came out, and this was one of the first feature films from Severin Fiala and Veronica Franz. They are Austrian directors. This was made in Austria. They really haven't done a whole lot other than this. This was something they both wrote and directed together. Really, their big follow-up to Goodnight, Mommy was something that I had kind of had my eye on for us to play. It's called The Lodge, which when I saw the trailer for The Lodge, I was like, this looks a lot like Goodnight, Mommy. So it was one that I had our eye on, and then things kind of went on pause for a bit. So we weren't able to bring that in, unfortunately. This stars, of course, real-life twins, Elias and Lucas Schwarz, that they were named after themselves. There was no real reason to give them other names, so those are their same names. And then Suzanne West was the mother in this. She's done a couple other acting roles, but you know, these are Austrian things, so outside of Austria, nothing too much of note. So that's what I have for this film today.
Yeah. So we brought this film in 2015. So it released in 14 and then kind of slowly rolled out in the indie world. And then we got it in 2015. And it was for Art House. It was our first true horror suspense film that we ever booked. And we were kind of excited to bring it in because, again, this was one of those films when we were brand new that we knew was not going to come to the multiplex that we as an organization would be able to bring to our city and have this unique film viewing experience for. I have distinct memories of just, you know, coming up after the film, and there's so much happening. We're not going to spoil anything at this moment, but there's so much happening within, you know, the film of suspense, and then the way it ends, and all of these things just coming up into the theater after people have watched it, and just the shock and awe, or some people just being giddy because they love that kind of stuff. Some people are like, what did I just watch? Why did I watch that? Those kinds of things. So as our first horror film we ever screened, it's got a special place in my heart. This film sits at 149 in the as far as top films. So definitely not high up there. But again, as our first horror film, I liked it because it brought in a unique crowd to Art House for the first time. That for many people, this was potentially their first film ever at art house. So with that, we're going to jump into what we call the spoiler-free section. So a lot of the films we play have some spoilers involved that we don't want to give any of those away at this moment. So if you haven't seen this film, you are safe for the next couple minutes. But this is definitely one of those films that you want to avoid spoilers on and go into it with a fresh set of eyes before you experience it. So in the spoiler-free section, any production tidbits you guys want to mention? Brian, you already mentioned that the twins are real-life twins. The names used in the film are their real-life names. And so that's, I think, obviously just a little interesting production tidbit. Anything else you guys found interesting you'd want to throw out there?
I like the way it was filmed. I know it was the 35 millimeters, so everything had sort of a cast over it, kind of a real different, eerie kind of quality, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those films that, I mean, it's a suspense thriller, but it's also an art piece. You can tell that they, the way that they lit the shots and framed the shots and those kinds of things. This is indie art in some ways, which I think worked really well for the film itself. This didn't feel big budget.
Yeah, this was sort of one of those early entries, because I know, especially in horror films, the art horror film genre has kind of had a resurgence in the last 10 years for sure, but even more in like the last 7 or so. It's really, and this was kind of one of the early ones. And then A24 has definitely brought in a lot more with Hereditary, and even before that there was things like It Follows and The Witch that kind of were much more art house films that had a horror slant to them, which had kind of gone out of fashion for a while. Horror was always like teenage films and stuff like that. I Know What You Did Last Summer and things like that was kind of taking over for a long time. So this was kind of bringing it back to something a little bit more depth to it. The thing that and this is actually the first time I've seen this before, so I'm going into it a lot more fresh than either of you. But I had read that this was actually shot chronologically, which for people that don't make films, a lot of times films are shot out of order. A lot of times due to scheduling with actors, with where you can get your location secure. You shoot it there and then you shoot another scene, or you as budget allows, you shoot something and then you end up taking a hiatus and you do things differently. So it's fairly rare that something is shot in chronological order, as in as you see it play out in the film is the order that they shot those scenes as well. And so reading that was kind of interesting, of how, like I said, it's a rare thing that you see when a film is made that way. So
yeah, and I saw something somewhere that the actors weren't actually given a full script, so they filmed it chronologically and were kind of discovering the story as they went. Essentially, I didn't just find out a lot about that. Maybe I should dig a little deeper on that. But that's a fascinating way to make a movie like this, that you shoot it chronologically and you're discovering the script as you go, kind of thing. I also found it interesting that the actress who plays the mom, she lived in isolation for 3 months to prepare for this role. So she's got a little creep to her. And
we're all preparing for this role right now.
That's what I find really fascinating.
There's
we're all getting ready.
You notice there's tons of Art Deco in her house, their house, everywhere. Just really different pieces of art that actually connect with what I feel is going on with the film. Okay. As far as the different characters go. So I was looking at all those different things and going, they put that in there for a reason. And maybe they didn't, but I feel like they did.
Yeah. No, I think it's definitely one of those films, particularly when you go back and watch it a second time, that you notice a lot of things that I would agree with you, Shelley. I think everything feels like it's intentional on one level or another. And whether it's intentional from a mood or feel standpoint, or intentional for a storytelling standpoint, there's so much that even after you watch it a couple times, you're still left questioning. You still don't know all the answers to what's happening in the film. There's obviously some major reveals, but I I think the filmmakers did a great job of leaving little clues that if you want to try to piece everything together, you can piece everything together, whether it's the mom's backstory, the family's backstory, the boy's backstory, all these kinds of things. A lot of it's speculation, but you can kind of look at these different scenes and go, okay, I think maybe they're trying to say this or this or this or this, which for a lot of people, I mean, is why the film really holds up as a true art piece more than just, I think, a horror film with jump scares. There really isn't any jump scares. There's a couple moments that are definitely not that you jump at because you don't want to see them, but it's not necessarily something jumping out of the closet at you kind of thing. Yeah. So any other production tidbits, or should we move this puppy along, people?
Okay. I think we're good to move along.
All right. So with that, we're going to jump into the spoiler section. So again, if you haven't seen the film, spoiler warning, because there's a lot to spoil in this film that if you have not seen it, we don't want to be the ones. I don't want to be personally responsible to ruin it for you at all. So when we jump into the spoiler section, what we like to start out with is our best scene or moment within the film. What's the thing that we enjoyed the most? So Shelley, we're going to start with you because I know you had a couple thoughts and ideas. So what was one of your best scenes or moments that worked the best for you?
It's interesting because when I watched the film the first time, there was a scene in there that really caught my eye. Mm-hmm. And it was when the mom, who's clearly had some plastic surgery, and you're going throughout watching this whole movie and trying to figure out why, did something happen? Why is she having the plastic surgery? And there was this moment when I connected all this together because there's so many different hints of, there's a big full-size photo of her that's blurred out in the hallway in the movie. There's pictures of females in clothes. And it might be because of what I do in my other life besides art house, but she had clearly gone in for plastic surgery. And during the whole film, you weren't sure whether did she go into plastic surgery because she had an accident or what was going on. And what I noticed was there was a particular scene where she was standing in front of the mirror, and it was a full-length mirror. And it was clear to me that there was some things within her that she was totally not happy about, almost like she had a body dysmorphic issue where she was turning and looking and lifting, and she, just by the look, even though her face was bandaged, you could tell that she was not happy with the way she looked. And I know that just by the backstory of the movie that it looked like she had been a model, she had been in TV. There were so many things that I felt like that she was trying to keep up with. And so when I saw that scene from that movie, I was just like floored. I was like, oh my gosh, she had plastic surgery because she felt like she needed to be better and better. Yeah. Whether that stemmed from experiences like the divorce or anything like that, I think that just resonated with me. Mm-hmm. And then the first scene of the movie that opens up the entire movie with that creepy lullaby. And I know it's not supposed to be creepy, and I didn't think it was creepy when I watched it the first time. The second time I was like, oh my gosh, this actually to me was brilliant because it was all foreign language and it was all these kids surrounding their mother. And now that you watch that again and you go, oh, this was creepy, like mm-hmm. a total dream, this movie is going to put you in a very bad state, and everyone who is in the film is going to be in a very bad state, or they're going to think they're in an extremely horrible dream. Yeah, it's just creepy.
No, I agree. So on both of those points, I think that the creepiness of the opening scene, you know, so much of art is all about the context of what you're experiencing the art in. So, you know, a beautiful painting in an art gallery where you're kind of in this place and mindset to experience something and really process it is, you know, incredible versus maybe seeing something hung, you know, let's say in the locker room at the YMCA, you know, like you're just, because of the context of where the piece is, you're going to experience it differently. And I think this film does a great job of it. There's so many of those artistic scenes that have a creep factor to them because of the context of you, like you are just physically in a space that you know, okay, this is going to creep me out. Like there's something happening here and I'm not quite sure. And I remember that opening scene the first time I watched it at Art House, and it was just so creepy, but it's just like this little lullaby. Like, why am I creeped out? And I think it speaks to the context that we have placed ourselves in, that we know. And I'm not saying the filmmakers didn't do things to help the creep factor, but you know, it just reminded me of that. The piece though about the mom and her plastic surgery and all that stuff, that's one of those little kind of tidbit trails that the filmmakers are kind of answering, but I don't think they're working too hard to blatantly, you know, shout it from the rooftops, this is what's going on. And I think it works really well. And I really, you know, kind of appreciate your insight and thoughts on that, Shelley, from the standpoint of, you know, the first time I watched it, I was in the mindset of, okay, there was an accident, and in the accident, the brother dies and the mom got injured. You know, that kind of, that's just where I went. It's kind of probably the most surface level reading of it. But it's one of those things when you watch the film, no, there's more happening with the mom. She's obviously had some trauma to things, and her potential desire to get through that trauma through plastic surgery, through continuing to critique herself and keep herself in some semblance of shape, let's say, you know, that is, you know, that is her trying to deal with trauma, let's say, potentially. And how that plays out for her is a really, really fascinating reading. And I think, you know, intense reading of what's happening there. So I like it.
And you
Brian?
could say the same thing. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Shelley.
You could say the same thing, like the scene where she walks out into the woods and it almost looks like a body snatcher scene where her head is like, you know, just freaking out everywhere. And clearly to me, I felt that was maybe a vision that one of her sons was seeing, but it kind of tied into the fact that she was just trying to become something else and trying to focus and trying to put other things that were horrifically wrong in her past together. And so to me, seeing that scene in her bedroom and then all the plastic surgery and then her doing that, all that just kind of tied in to me, whether it was meant to do that or not. That's what I thought. Okay, so the son is seeing what he wants to see, that his mother is not who she is. But I kind of tied that all in together with that whole piece of her trying to deal with divorce, death, grief, everything that she's trying to do to get rid of everything else and to make everything that's going on right now better. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I think that I would say the filmmakers are trying to point towards that interpretation and reading of things from my vantage point, more than she was in an accident kind of thing, because there are scenes where you see her body and her body is not, you know, there's not broken bones or scrapes and cuts and, you know, to the level that you would think if that's what her face looked like, you know, that kind of thing. So I think there's something more happening than, like I said, that surface level.
And later in the film, the boys find the picture on the wall of her with the markings on it, which even in those pictures, she isn't beat up or something where they're saying, oh, we can do reconstructive surgery here. This is definitely a cosmetic surgery. So,
yeah. Agreed. So. Brian, how about you? What's the thing that sticks out to you as some of the best scenes or moments?
The first thing, again, this is the first time I've seen it, but the first thing that I really caught on to that I enjoyed, again, it's fairly early in the film, and it's, you know, I'm already intrigued of where is this going, what's the story we're telling here, and I liked the more or less the exposition dump, and you know, they are pretty subtle with their exposition, but they did it very cleverly with this game where they put the Post-it note on their head and they're trying to, you know, guess about each other and playing this game as a family. And when they play with her, they just put Mama on her forehead, and as she's asking questions, and whether they answer yes or no, you're actually learning more about her. Without having to do a lengthy exposition, without, you know, being like, I was on television before and now it's like, nope, we're gonna do this little game that kind of gives you enough clues into who this woman is without again a convoluted exposition dump. But it also added to the conflict too of, as they're giving her things and as she's guessing things correctly, you can tell that there's also a disconnect, that she's not recognizing that it's her, and then that starts to give the audience the questioning as well, is this the mother or not? Because that's, you know, sort of the whole frame of this film, and that's kind of an early clue as to, you know, they've given her so many hints and yet she's still unable to recognize it as herself. So I thought that was a very well done scene in terms of little exposition dump and then also adding some conflict in there. So
I think this movie deals. I think this movie deals in not up front, but behind how people act when they're dealing with grief. And so I think there's a lot of things that were going on, like when you were talking about the dump, and how there was such a disconnect between. There were times when you were thinking like, she doesn't even really act like she loves her child. I mean, there was such a disconnect of like emotion, and it seemed to me that there was more just putting up with something and more anger, more. I think that you would not think that a horror film would have anything to do with grief, but I think that this movie kind of dealt with a lot of different things on the horror aspect that you would not think it would. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, I assume, Brian, a little bit of what you're pointing out when you talk about this resurgence of horror films within the art house circuit.
Yeah,
you know, that's what a lot of these horror films in the indie world are doing really well. Is there is the scare factor, the the creep factor, whatever, but there's also this narrative happening underneath the surface that we got to sit and have a conversation about, that kind of thing. So I think this film does that really well. I think for me, to tag on to a little bit of what you said, Brian, there'd be two moments. One is the scene at when she's pouring the juice and preparing the meal for the boys, and she just does it for the one. I think it's a really the whole film is well written on a lot of fronts, that it holds up for multiple viewings, that you can fine tooth comb it, because here it is, spoiler alert, there's only one of the boys, Elias, and Lucas is gone, and so Elias has seen his brother the whole film, where mom is not seen, and the brother existed, and so all of a sudden you have this interaction where she's interacting with her alive son, but the son has this pretend interaction with his brother, and she's going through her grief process and not wanting to entertain her son, that Lucas is still around. Like, I'm not playing this game anymore, she says. And so, there's so many scenes like that I think it's well written, it does well. And so you view it from the boy's vantage point, and all of a sudden you're seeing, this is a really cruel woman. Like, what happened that all of a sudden you're not even feeding or caring for this boy? So the first time through, you're totally in the camp of the boys in a lot of ways, of like, what's up with mom? And then the second viewing, or you go back and kind of rehash some of these scenes, and it's like, oh yeah, that is, if she's dealing with her own trauma, and she's potentially in a lot of physical pain, and all these things are happening, of course she's not in a mood to entertain some fantasy about her dead son that she's trying to process and go through. Like, I'm not going to play this game with you. Like, we need to deal with this. So I think that scene, there's a lot of scenes like it, but that one for me always sticks out, is done really, really well. And then this is just a little scene, but when the mom goes to bed for the last time, and there's there's the shot of the door, or the windows going into her room, right, and the boys pop up as silhouettes, and the music kind of changes, and I mean the whole film changes at that point. And I just think it's again, this was a scene for me, second time viewing, I enjoyed a lot more. It's a quick hit for sure, but I thought it was just really, really well done. It wasn't a jump scare, but it was, okay, something's coming and we've taken a turn here, people. Like, this is no longer let's sit back and wonder. This is, okay, now we're in this, everybody buckle up, like something's about to go down. And I just thought that was really, really well done on a lot of fronts. So any other bet? Go ahead.
Sorry, the quick hit you were talking about. So
yeah,
I didn't, probably like a lot of people, didn't realize that there was just one child for a while into this movie. And part of it is me, because I like to, like, I look at everything. I listen to the music. I look at all the different things that are going on in a movie. But they had this whole premise of, how did the brother die? Did he die in a fire? Did he die in an accident? Did he? And for me, one of the scenes was the lake scene,
Yep.
where Elias was on the floaty and he was calling for his brother Lucas, and all of a sudden you see this blurp thing in the middle
Yep.
of the lake. And I didn't, after I watched it the second time, I was like, whoa, okay, so maybe that's how he died. And so it almost feels like he was looking, like he was so mentally incapacitated at that time that he was looking for him, like, where are you? He hadn't really fully realized that his brother was actually gone.
Yep.
And so that kind of really struck me pretty hard too.
Yeah, I think it's a well done scene, and I agree with you. I think whether it was an accident or a fire, I think a fire could potentially, they leave a lot of breadcrumbs for potentially a fire, that the brother is the one responsible for his twin's death through fire potentially. But I think water is definitely, there's a scene with the cat in the fish tank and all this stuff, that it just there's something going on here. This is not normal or okay. So let's jump into nitpicks, you guys. And I got to be honest with you. So the first time I watched this, again, context, I experienced a horror film, a suspense film, and walked away satisfied and content. And man, this has got a great twist, and I'm great with it. For whatever reason, I think it holds up for a second viewing on the, just watching for the twin dynamic and how they play that out. And, do they break their own rules that they set up, with the reveal at the end, those kinds of things. And I think it holds up. But for whatever reason, my major nitpick was the art element of the film. I just kind of got bored. If I'm really, really honest, it's like a half hour, or no, excuse me, it's an hour of the film of just nothing really happening. You're just you're wondering, you're asking questions. I think the first time you watch it, potentially you're in this place of, oh man, there's suspense, you're waiting. But the second time, because I knew what was going to happen, I can enjoy some of the scenes. But I just rewatched it before. I mean, we've talked about the film and how I enjoyed it, and I just got to be honest and say the second time it just was really, really slow for me personally. So that would be, and I don't even know what a nitpick would be on that, or how I would fix that or change it as a filmmaker. But it felt like not a ton of story, elongated over an hour and 40 minutes runtime. So, and I definitely experienced that the second time. So that would be one nitpick for me that I would have. I got some others, but you guys better go first.
For me, and again, I've only seen it one time, so I haven't had as long to gestate over all the moments, all the scenes, and that I haven't even rewatched it in order to catch up on the little things that I missed the first time. And that the one scene that in this building of a mystery, it seemed like they wanted to have certain things that are unexplained, as to the mother's behavior and stuff like that. And one of them was this this food delivery shows up with a bunch of frozen food, and they stockpile this deep freezer in the basement with a bunch of frozen food, and a lot of it pizza, and then later in the film they kind of reveal other things, and I keep going back to that, and I'm like, I don't quite understand what the point of the stockpiling food was, because I mean, and I mean, the more I can look into it, it's possible I missed something, but I mean, later in the film we also find out that she put the house for sale, so you'd think, why are you stockpiling? I mean, the guy even comments, like, you have like a year's worth of pizza here, and it's like, why did she stockpile a bunch of food if they're trying to sell the house? The one explanation I could have is that, in her state of grief and her, whatever, she just didn't want to deal with cooking. She didn't want to deal. I mean, she's potentially going back to work, things like that. Like, she might just be kind of stockpiling a bunch of things so that she just doesn't even have to worry about food for a while. But I don't know. It just didn't really quite add up for me.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that I'd agree with you even the second time through. I don't know that there's a payoff for that scene.
Yeah.
I think that there is, some, I think they are pointing to mom's trauma potentially and her desire not to be fully engaged in preparing all these meals, and that this is a long-term thing that, is going to be happening where mom is not engaging. But I totally agree. Like, it's just this, it feels like a funny scene. Hey, you guys like a pizza? You guys like the pepperoni, huh? That's not the accent. Yeah. So, but I agree with you on that, Brian. I don't know that there's a full payoff for it, for sure. I loved the scene. This is probably simultaneously one of my favorite scenes and a big nitpick. But as a guy that is, we're fundraising, and I've spent a good amount of my time and energy trying to fundraise before. I love the Red Cross scene where they knock on a door, no one answers, so they walk in and they just start walking around the house and like, hey, no, the door was open, so we're just looking for somebody. Like, yeah. And then they take money from kids, and they're like,
they waited.
Yeah,
they waited for like ever.
I know. I'm just like, what kind of fundraising scenario? And obviously this is not America, but like, what kind of fundraising scenario do I go knock on someone's door? They're not home, so I wait, and then I negotiate with their kids to give me a bunch of money. Like, I get it from a like a tension building scene. That's one of the best in the film. That are the boys going to get discovered? The scene works on that level for sure. Yeah. But for me, it's I don't think there's any fundraising scenario where I want to walk in and I just because I left my door unlocked, the Red Cross is at my table. Like it just felt so silly. At the same time, I'm also like, how do I find fundraisers like that? So if you are interested in fundraising for our house on this manner and you think it'll work, man, give us a call. We'd love to get you going, because that is some good fundraising those people were doing. Shelley, how about you? Any nitpicks?
You might raise some funds for us, and you might de-escalate a murder. So
you might. So my nitpick was it went from this really indie Austrian film to why are cockroaches coming out of, like, when they cut her stomach open and the cockroaches came out, that part for me was like, okay. So it made it almost a little campy for me at that point. I just thought I know they were feeding her the cockroaches throughout her tying up or whatever it was, but that part was just like, and I know that it was in his mind that he was doing that, because clearly if it wasn't, she would be screaming, and she was like laying there asleep, and I just thought, okay. And I guess I just kind of contradicted myself, because if you went back and watched it, you would have realized the second time that was he was having a dream. Mm-hmm. But I just thought that was bizarre.
I think
just bizarre, like this big hole and cockroaches flying out of it at a constant rate.
Yeah, I think that, I can understand where you're coming from. I think they did a good job of communicating that was a dream, particularly the second time you watch it. Like, that exists in his head, and the way they cut the film together, you see that. I also feel like, particularly the second time you watch it, when you know how the film ends and the amount of torture and that they end up killing their mom, like they have to, or he has to really, really, really believe that something truly grotesque is happening or has happened to his mom, like for him to commit those acts. And so for me, it makes sense from the standpoint of course it has to be more than just, she didn't serve my brother, a meal. Right. There has to be more convincing that this is truly something demonic and horrible and awful. And I'm saving the day by doing this. So For
And
me, that
he's
kind of
he's
works.
viewing it in his mind that this isn't my mother. This
My
is
mom.
infestation of someone else,
Mhm.
and
Right.
the bugs kind of, are an
Or the
allegory for that.
infestation. It's kind
The
of
bugs.
interesting because the they do it for me when I what I got out of so how the mom dealt with her trauma versus how the child dealt with his trauma. So basically the child went through divorce and then clearly there was an accident that involved his brother where he felt responsible for it. And then there was the mom who was going through her own grief and she went through her own transformation. And dealing with that was so horrific that it totally, in my opinion, split him. And in order to deal with all the bad stuff, he had to create his brother there. So his brother, in my opinion, was the one that was feeding his rage or his grief. And so that whole thing kind of, I mean, when you look back at it, it's so sad because
Mm-hmm.
there was all those different stages of trauma and grief and everything that he was going through. And then it's so bad that he has to have this horrific split to where he pretends his brother is there and his brother is doing all the bad stuff or
Mhm.
trying to make him do all the bad stuff.
Mhm.
Because you see these glimpses of Luca of Elias and how kind he is, and there's times in the movie where you see him and he feels bad for what he's doing, but then he's got the brother that's saying, "Oh no, 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 we have to do this. This isn't right."
Mm-hmm.
So you can tell there's just a total 100% personality split where
Mhm.
he is just not dealing with everything, and so his brother's taken over and he's going to do it.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
speaking of the trauma piece, there's a desire for control in the midst of situations like that, where you start to grab onto whatever you can grab onto to feel like you have some semblance of control in the midst of a situation you don't really want, and I think that that's happening there. Another nitpick that I have both times I watched it, I had this thought. So if the boy's glue or the boy glues his mom to the ground and then they light a fire, doesn't that glue start to melt after, like, isn't she able to get up pretty sooner rather than later? Maybe I just don't know how glue works, but I felt like it got pretty hot there. Like she'd be able to be like, all right, I'm up here. That is some hella strong glue in my mind. If she's like truly stuck until she's fully engulfed in flames. Again, I don't know how glue and flame works, so if anybody watching on Facebook and you can enlighten me that would be the case, you're more than welcome to jump on board. What's that, Shelley? I missed
Yeah,
it.
that's maybe you should ask Steve Hovis
We could
about
ask
how glue
we,
reacts.
we could ask our art house handyman, Steve Ovis, how does glue react? We could try
We've
it.
all
Just
got
glue.
time. We can do tests at home.
Yep. I think that we're on to something. Let's glue something to the floor, get it
Sure,
hot,
if
and
I
then
was
see at what point.
outside lighting glue on fire, my husband would have thought, okay, she's been in quarantine long enough. She's gone crazy.
And then when you tell him it's for work, he really starts to have
Oh,
an
okay.
issue with it. So for nitpicks for me, I mean, I know I said it at the beginning, but honestly, that big one is just the pacing of the film the second time through. I just not much happens in that first hour to, I think, warrant what takes place in the last half hour. For me personally, I think the first time you could potentially be in a lot more suspense, what's going to happen, psychologically trying to figure it out and foreshadow what's going to take place. But that was the big one for me. So, any other nitpicks before we move on?
It's the same sort of feeling I had about Sixth Sense. Once you've seen it the first time, the second time it starts to lose a little something.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. So jumping into, Michelle, you kind of already had some thoughts on this, the what's it all about conversation around this film. I think, the concept of trauma and how we deal with trauma, or how, everybody has a different approach to dealing with trauma, and it's rarely pretty and perfect and awesome in a nice, neat little bow. I don't think this film is reflective of very many people's stories, obviously, but I think it is pointing at that. I think for me, when we talk about what it's all about, I think this is a film that does an incredible job of pointing at perspective or narratives that we hold as individuals. And, you know, the mom has her own perspective and narrative, and she's working to live that out. And there's a reality that she's living that out in the midst of it, whether it's her plastic surgery or whether it's how she's choosing to treat her son in the moment and what he's going through. She has a perspective, and then her son obviously has a perspective. And the way that the film, I think the film does a good job of this in my mind. It forces us to realize that when we are have a certain perspective or a certain narrative, and we're unwilling to see what's really going on, we're unwilling to change our perspective. I would use the phrasing of our belief system. We're unwilling to change our belief system or viewpoint on something, independent of whatever it is we're experiencing or whatever harm and painship and brokenness we're bringing. We're unwilling to change it. Like, this film, I think, is interesting on that front, because obviously the son, he's unwilling to change his perspective. He's in, like, this is not my mom, and there's nothing that she's going to be able to do or is going to happen that she's going to be able to convince him otherwise. So there's that. But even the mom, like, she has this perspective of, by the end, she's saying, like, I'll play the game, I'll pretend that he's there. But I never really see her. I kind of wanted to see her fight more, I guess, for her life, fight more for like just this arguing thing. It feels like she kind of gives up when the torture is happening and those kinds of things. Obviously, she's screaming and trying to say no and all those things, right. But she just had her own vantage point and perspective that she was, it was very unwilling and difficult for her to change. So I think, obviously we are in a season right now as a country and as a world where there's multiple perspectives on things. And I don't think there's any political message to this, and I'm not even trying to get political. I just think it's an interesting study or story around the concept of the potential harm and damage we bring when we're unwilling to see what's really going on for the sake of our own belief system or perspective. So that was something I found fascinating with this film.
So I really identified with the mom. I don't know if it identified with her, but I was picking out a lot more things with her. So as I was watching the movie, I was seeing that the life-size photo of her in the hall that was blurred, the big metal corset artwork that was in her bedroom, all the female things that were throughout the figurines on the shelves, all that different stuff. I'm not saying that there weren't pictures of the family, because there were, but as far as, I think she was totally shut down, in my opinion. And that's why when you were talking about why isn't she fighting towards the end? So she was dealing with such a grief thing that she just didn't want, she was like, I think she was tired. And I think at the end of the movie, you kind of see a few things, and I know we're going to talk about that too, but I think there was just so much breakdown there, like so much breakdown. There was a disconnect with the child, and she was dealing with her own grief. And so there was no way that she could even possibly connect with him. There did not seem, at times there was, but only when something huge happened. Like if he did something wrong and then she felt bad, she would hug him and feel bad. Or if she was dragging him up the stairs and locking him in his room, and then she'd feel bad. I think there was just no way for her to deal with any of the grief she was experiencing, from the divorce to the death of a child, which makes it even worse.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Yeah, she was running on empty for sure. There wasn't much in the tank, you could tell. So, Brian, how about for you? Any big takeaways?
Kind of going with what you were saying, Matt. I think it's part of what I was seeing with this is just a lack of communication between these two people, of not expressing these emotions during this time of grief. And again, it's a combination of the death of the son, the divorce, and even just her going back to more or less trying to go back to normal in this sense, but not really communicating with her son about all this stuff. It seems like this failure of communication, and she talks that she had at one time indulged the fantasy, but then stepped away from it, and but it's even that one scene where he walks into her bedroom to look at her, and then when he leaves, you see that she was pretending to sleep. It was like she was avoiding having to even communicate with him in that point, because she's trying to essentially get back to her own life at this point, and doesn't want to. But it was a failure of communication to be honest with him about her feelings, what she's up to, and try to nip these feelings that he's having a little bit more, so that it doesn't escalate to this point. I mean, it's hard to watch sometimes, some of those torture scenes towards the end, but it was not even really being able to express herself then of anything. She's still just kind of lost in that. So,
and I think ties into what the horror of the film is on some levels. It's not just the torture scenes at the end. It's this true breakdown of one of the most significant relationships of a mother and her son. And there's this breakdown that's happening, and then the horror of the torture that a son would do this to their mom is just ramps that up to 11, obviously. But that's the kind of underbelly, I think, for me, of like the scary piece that this is happening between a mother and son, and that communication and ability to connect is just gone.
Think about the isolation they created. They started creating the isolation from the very beginning. They lived out in the middle of nowhere. So there was isolation there. There was isolation with the mom. There was isolation with the son. I mean, the whole movie screamed isolation. They did a really good job, though, of identifying that at the beginning. There was literally no one around. Even when they went into the town, that part I could nitpick that, because there was nobody there except the priest or the pastor in the church. Like, there was nobody in the whole town. There wasn't people walking around. I mean, they created this whole isolation world where it was just those two people. Well, technically three, but they did a really good job. They did a really good job of making that whole isolation thing tie in with the whole entire movie until the very end.
So any comments on how to go deeper on this? So I got to be honest, I'm not a giant horror suspense film aficionado on a lot of levels, so I don't necessarily have a lot of things to point at, other than if you want to go deeper, sons, make sure you're talking to your mothers and that you are connecting well with them in isolation. Isolation.
Power in isolation.
There you go.
I found out a bunch of things because I did a lot of research. If you go back and watch the movie, you will see, when the house is on fire, you will see a woman come around the back of the house, and it's the mom. Then that ties into the end with the kids when they're like, I don't know if it's heaven. I don't really know.
Yeah.
But that's really cool. Pop Horror is a website you can go on, and they really go into detail about what you could potentially take out of this film, what you want to take out of this film, and what they think you could get out of this film. Because there's 3 to 4 different scenarios that you could pull out of this movie if you wanted to.
Yeah. Brian, anything for you on how to go deeper?
Not really. Like I said, I don't know much else about these filmmakers. I was excited to see The Lodge at some point. I think it might be available on VOD in about a month. So currently there's really no way to see it, so too bad. But that one looks like it could be a good follow-up to this one. Again, kind of in a similar, isolated environment in that one. So I was interested to see that one. And that's cool. That's really all I got on this one. I don't even have other similar films to point to.
Sorry, go ahead, Shelley.
You could focus on you could focus on this, if you really want to get a lot of things of this, the isolation, the grief, the mental illness, everything. I mean, there's so much that it could tie into anything in anyone's life, actually,
Yep.
if you dug deep enough.
Yep. So there you go, Brian. You got to watch it a second time. Dive
Yep.
deep, my friend. Hey, before we go tonight, first and foremost, Shelley, thanks for joining us from your lovely home.
Thanks for
But
having me.
of course, I want to make sure that everybody knows we're launching something this Friday as a movie theater. We can't play movies, but we are going to start hosting some new releases in the independent world. So this is a partnership that we have with different independent film distributors that we typically work with. And so this Friday, we're going to be launching your opportunity to check out some of that. So maybe one of two things. One, you are supporting Art House by purchasing a ticket off our website to stream one of these new release films, or two, you're just looking to stay in the know of what's out there and happening in the independent film world. So, Brian, would you tell a little bit about what those films are coming on this Friday, and then we will wrap this puppy up.
Yeah, we've got two new films coming out this Friday. One of them comes from Oscilloscope Laboratories. It is St. Francis, which I know Shelley had a chance to see. So, Shelley, what did you think?
I love that movie. They deal with two really heavy subject matters in that film, and they do it very well. It's beautiful.
Awesome. Yeah. So those that will be available on Friday. Don't know the exact time. I'm waiting on distributors to give me all the assets to get them out to you, but definitely on Friday that will be available for you to rent. Usually you have a few days to check that out once you purchase that ticket. The other film we are going to have is Extraordinary. It is an Irish comedy, a paranormal comedy. It was considered to be sort of like a cross between Ghostbusters and Napoleon Dynamite. It stars Will Forte from Last Man on Earth and Saturday Night Live. Don't know much of it. I haven't seen it, but I would definitely want to check that one out for sure. Definitely, especially if you're watching this because you're a bit of a horror fan. This is a comedy kind of based off of your favorite genre there. So it's also been compared to What We Do in the Shadows. So there's that as well. So both of those, again, available this Friday. Go to arthousebillings.com and you'll see right at the top of the page, you'll see links to where you can get that starting this Friday.
Yeah. So make sure to stay following along on social media. Be checking out our website. Thank you to those of you that continue to support our work in what we're doing in Billings. We can't wait to get back to showing films. And in the meantime, make sure to check out one of those films, like and share, and get the word out about what's happening in your community. As I said at the beginning, I hope you're doing well. I hope everybody's staying safe. Other than that, have a great night, everybody. And we will be back next Wednesday for our next Art House Rewind. We're going to be doing Lego Movie 2. And we have a very special guest that I can't wait to have conversation with him about. So other than that, hope to see you all very, very soon. Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.